Well, welcome, guys, and welcome in Don Sweeney, GM of the Boston Bruins. Don, you've been talking to media all week, so thank you for giving us some of your time. I know you don't have a lot of it, but you've been generous with it, and we're going to get right into it. It is July 2nd, a day after free agency opened up, but of course, it's still not closed. Lots of moves might be made by teams coming up in the next couple of weeks, but for now, we're going to focus on what you've been able to do, and I want to start with just the overarching theme. Something you talked about with the guys and girls in the at Warrior yesterday was the identity of the team you want to create going into next season. So can you give us a summary of what you want the Boston Bruins to look like and feel like when they're playing against other teams with these new additions?
Oh, good morning, Casey. Sophia, thanks for having me on. The last few weeks have certainly been a lot of moving parts, identification of what our team has a chance to look like moving forward. Again, we have some younger players that we certainly want to allow for opportunity for them to make our club. If they're able to contribute in the way we feel that they're capable of, then they're going to get that opportunity. So we started with a little bit of in-house things, and Morgan Geekie and John Beecher and America Jeannot. We took care of our RFA situations and built out our roster from there. Now, we certainly wanted to make sure we were acutely aware of the goal scoring potential in the marketplace and how we were going to try and add to our group. That became a little more difficult, but again, we focused a lot on creating the identity of being a much harder team again. Overall, we were a little disappointed with how we were in games, but not really in games, and we want to make sure that our group is ready to play each and every night. Marco has an attention to detail and structure mentality that our players are going to benefit from moving forward. The lineup itself is still going to be a bit of a moving target, as I referenced some of the younger players, but the veteran guys that we did bring in are going to bring a lot more juice, identity, hardness to play against, which allows some of the skilled guys to have a little more space. I think we'll be a better forechecking team as a result of those moves. And then we're going to rely on a little bit of the return to health mentality of our hockey club that just wasn't last year. So I think we'll be better all across the board defensively, which includes our goaltending. We spoke a little bit about that yesterday in the internal competition. You now have Jeremy that will be in camp, for the full time, and I think we'll get off on the right foot for all of our group to be recharged and energized. I think in particular some of the guys that we addressed, Mike Eyssimont, Tanner Jeannot, Sean Kuraly, they just bring a hardness and energy and a ready to compete attitude every day, which will carry over for in a positive manner for all of our group.
Yeah, well, something that's really exciting about gearing towards identity is there seems to be a number of reunions with this free agency group. You've got Arvidsson, who's familiar with Sturm. You've got Tanner Jeannot and Mikey Eyssimont that played together in Tampa. I actually got a chance to cover him, both of these players. So with the familiarity of a number of these free agents, do you think that's going to help mold the identity and kind of help you guys reach that goal a little bit quicker?
Well, I think it allows the guys to assimilate with each other a little quicker. What's unique, maybe not unique about hockey players, but certainly hockey players are very open to welcoming players. When you have Arvidsson, immediately talking to Elias, and Tanner reaching out to Morgan Geekie because they've crossed paths, and the same thing with Mikey having been a teammate of Tanner. I just think it blends to getting the group to come together a little more quickly than what you might have imagined. Maite Blumel has reached out to David Pasternak, and it felt like he was welcomed into our group immediately. So I think those things show the openness of our team and hockey players in general, and hopefully that will get them on the ground running. Sean Kuraly's been in this marketplace. He knows. He grew up under such great leadership, and he became an important leader while Columbus was going through a transition. Now he come back to our group as a really established, very comfortable in his own skin type of player that can add a lot of energy, a lot of leadership, and the specialty team component. PK in particular with Sean was also very important to us.
Yeah, you mentioned Sean Kuraly when he was with the Boston Bruins, took turns being on the third and fourth line, something Kasey and I were talking about that we want to address. Obviously, we've seen what successful teams have in the postseason and when they go far, and that is just all four lines kind of rolling. We hope that the first line with Elias Lindholm, I mean, we'll see how it shapes out, but I'm just naming some of the top six guys. But Morgan Geekie, we hope that his performance continues to rise. David Pastrnak, Elias Lindholm gets better. So if you get that kind of first primary scoring, we know how important secondary scoring is, but it's not just scoring, it's the physicality, it's the grit. Can you just talk about how important the third and fourth line and establishing these guys fighting for spots is going to be to help the success of the team?
Well, that was part of it. The internal competition now within our group, and the way Marco looks at it, if he starts Zach in the middle of the ice, that will give a younger player a tremendous opportunity in a scoring role, in a potential top six role. You mentioned Alex Steve, or I mentioned Alex Steve, and you got Maite Blumel, who are prolific scorers at the AHL. And you have to eventually give a player an opportunity to see if that translates. And they're both young players. They've had success. So we're going to see where they fit in. You play them in preseason. If they make your team, you play them early in the season in some offensive opportunity roles, and as well as the power play, and see if it translates. And, then you talk about the middle part of our lineup, the depth part of our lineup. If you're going to push, Pavel up and play in a skill position, say with Kasey, and/or go up and play with David again, and Morgan, who had a tremendous season for us, and we know that line can work. So the mix and match of what Marco and his group is going to do early on, it's going to uncover whether or not any of the players can handle a top six slash top nine offensive role. I would put Fraser Minton, I would put Lysell, I would put Matty Poitras, who has played in a third line role. So we're gonna find out. And we're going to get through camp. We know we can default back a little bit to what the lines worked last year from the standpoint of putting Pav up there. You put Kasey in. We have the middle of the ice, I think, covered, and then we're going to see whether or not players move to the wing and what our scoring potential can be.
As you guys kind of solidify that bottom six, you talk about the young players kind of having opportunities. How do you see these young players kind of pushing your veteran players as they battle it out for these spots, for one? And for two, you mentioned Minton and a couple of these other young guys. What overarching things do you want to see in their development to actually compete for these spots?
Well, that was another indication for us in terms of allowing players to be comfortable in there and, trying to make it to the NHL, adapt to the NHL. You saw Matty Poitras go up and down in that regard, when he lost some confidence because his offensive game wasn't there. He got injured, hit the reset when he went down to Providence on occasions, was a point a game player there. So, we bring in Tanner Jeannot, who's a more than capable third line player. He has killed penalties. He's the type of player that can give some of these guys, some space, some comfort that they can go out and play their game. And we believe that if you look at that now, and maybe even more importantly moving forward, we just went into the draft and drafted some skill in James Higgins and Will Moore. We have other players that are going to come on the scene here within the next couple of years that can help us in that area. And we feel that Tanner Jeannot, you look at, maybe Gasso down the road, a bigger body that, again, can create space for some of the skill players that we plan to utilize this year and moving forward, where we're going to drive our scoring potential, in the right direction.
You mentioned James and Will Moore. You and I had a chance to talk about development camp and the evolution from not having any in the NHL and then to starting a development camp, and now it's evolved, at least with the Boston Bruins, with what you're trying to get out of it over the last decade or so. Can you talk about what you hope these young players, but specifically a James Higgins and a Will Moore and the higher draft picks, what you want to see out of them, or what you hope they get out of it by the end of the week heading into their season at BC?
Well, not to date myself, but it's a long time ago that I started the development, camp of the Boston Bruins. And if you go back and look, and we've had some good stories because obviously Adam McQuaid is running it now, and he was part of that. And it was, we probably overshot in terms of how tough those weeks were in the first few years. But they did. They sort of set guys up for the expectation of what camp and what the NHL, more importantly, also would how hard it is to make the league and stay in the league. So, we back off in those areas, and Adam and McQuaid and Parker Mackay, and you see the numerous people we bring in for guest coaches to cover really every area of development, touch points. When kids are going to go back, we try to give them a little bit of I would call it, it's not a manual, I would call it or a diary that they're starting to take ownership of the things that we're pointing out, okay? It's not fun to hear that you're deficient in some areas, but it's important to understand that these are the areas you need to grow in. You have attributes that are putting you on the doorstep of being a pro hockey player. But now the areas you got to fill in gaps. Sometimes it's getting stronger. Sometimes it's a skating deficiency. Sometimes you got to work on your shot. And those are the things for development camp that we focus on. It's not so much system play at all. It's an understanding of how you protect pucks and how you cycle pucks and why offense is generated off the cycle. It's not just a rush game. Too often than not, you see a lot of hockey at the lower levels that everything is just about a rush game. Well, you get to the NHL and coaches are pretty damn smart and pretty damn good, well prepared. You got your teams well prepared. They take away the rush game. Teams, it's common rhetoric to say, listen, most teams are going to play behind. That means you're going to play behind your defense, and most teams are going to check back above. And that makes space limited. So these are all things that we're just trying to get younger players to understand, but it's a little more individually based. Where are the skill sets of the current players and what we see as evaluation tools when we draft them, or if they're a free agent invite? And how do we sort of get them to understand we're not criticizing what your development is at this point in time. We're trying to enhance, and we're trying to make sure you understand you have areas that we would like to see you continue to work upon and take ownership of that.
Absolutely. You mentioned rush and kind of some new identities that could be reestablished with this team and this offense. You get Arvidsson has speed, Mikey Eyssimont that has speed. Is this something that you can see these free agents bringing to the table to level up this offense moving forward?
Yeah, and that'll depend a little bit on who's in the middle of the ice and how we're going to play. The success of teams that are really gifted in that area, have elite players that get through the middle of the ice with possession. Therefore, they're able to back D off and enter with possession. We're a team that's evolving in that area. In years past, we've been maybe a little more evolved in it and proficient in it. When you're talking about Bergerons and Krejcis of the world, those guys are elite playmakers through the middle of the ice. So, we have guys now that are capable of doing it, but we might not be quite built and ready for that. We may be able to play a little more of a forecheck game. And again, you have to give kudos to the Florida Panthers. They're back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. They are a very difficult team to play against. They recognize when space is, and they'll take the rush opportunities or outnumbered situations. But when they don't, they predominantly play behind you. And they really have a strong forecheck. They have a great cycle game, and they create offense that way. So they force you to make some mistakes and turnovers where they'll take advantage of transition. We also want to be able to do that. We want to play a little quicker, and get up ice and hopefully create some outnumbered rushes. Marco talked a lot about the coaching search of that we're going to play north, we're going to try and transition pucks, and we're going to play behind. Those are things that translate to to success in the National Hockey League. Now you have to have the skill, you have to have the ability to finish those situations. And I guess I look at Morgan Geekie as a good example of a player that came to us a couple of years ago and was a fourth line player predominantly. And, we had said, look, we think there's a little more here, Morgan, that if you do X, Y, and Z and continue, that doesn't mean he was necessarily, he played a lot of center, but we ended up moving Morgan to the wing, playing him in a top nine, and lo and behold, now he's a top line player playing with Pasternak and scored 33 goals. So his game has continued to evolve, and it's not just rush-based. He didn't score his 33 just because they were rush-based. That line is a little more focused because of Pasta's abilities to take ice and to generate. But as a philosophical mindset of our group, Marco wants to play, as I said, play north, get through the neutral zone. If you have space, let's back D off and take advantage of it, get our defense up ice. Hopefully cross your fingers that we're healthier back there. Missing Hampus and Charlie for predominantly most of the year. Hampus only played 15 or 17 games, I think it was. Those are big losses to your hockey club. And, you're not going to be, a transition rush-based team when two of your best defensemen are out of the lineup. again, not to be disparaging against any of the other players we have, but those are big pieces of our group. And they play on both sides of the puck. They start transition. You watch Charlie break out pucks, you watch Hampus break out pucks, and get up ice. That feeds into that transition game you're talking about. So are we built to play a high-speed, trade chance mentality? No, I don't think we are. Now we're going to, as I said, we're going to continue to evolve. In selecting some of the players recently we have, the players that are currently developing. You mentioned Eyssimont. It plays a speed game. We'll go north. We'll try and stretch the ice. Got 12 to 15 games last year that had a little bit of success, especially towards the end of it. His game needs to continue to evolve as well. In the same way we talk about development, he has to be a better cycle player. He has to manage pucks. He has to understand when to play behind. He does have a rush-based skill ability that may translate. But again, there are very few players that outscore deficiencies if you're not a 200-foot player both sides of the puck. And that's where we're trying to make sure our young players in particular understand that so they can go out and execute the way Marco and his staff wants to play.
I love all of those answers and that information you gave, but just zeroing in, we're going to let you go, Don, but zeroing in to wrap on Morgan Geekie. Love how you mentioned his development, what you saw in him, and what he was able to do. For those fans out there saying, oh, yeah, but he got to play with David Pastrnak, they don't understand that just because you're playing with one of the best players in the world, not everyone can do that, and Pastrnak also plays very well with him. So let's flip it on that way as well. And Morgan Geekie's reads and how he positions himself has made that possible for David Pastrnak too. Kasey and I are going to continue the conversation after this, but we're going to let you go. We know you're busy. It doesn't stop for you. So thank you again for giving us your time, Don, and we'll talk to you again in September.
Great. All right. Have a great day. Happy 4th, everybody. Okay?
Thank you.
Happy 4th.
All right. Be well. Thanks.
Bye.